In fact, just yesterday, the Texas Senate passed a resolution calling the crisis at the Texas-Mexican international border an emergency. This resolution called on Congress to take action and to support President Trump's emergency declaration. And you can read this on Breitbart.com. Our team there at our Border and Cartel Chronicles team has an article up on this and includes the entire text of this resolution. It's just very clear that they are concerned about the communities that they represent in Texas. And also, we have word from some of the charities that work with our immigration officials to take care of the migrants. They're experiencing a real strain on their system because of these unprecedented numbers. As we all know, the catch and release policy had been changed. On March 27th, the new policy was basically put into effect whereby federal officials are just releasing migrants right onto the street because they just don't have the facility space to hold them. And so we have charities in places like El Paso that are just scrambling to try to find facilities. In fact, one such organization, the Annunciation House in El Paso, Texas, they spent more than $1 million in the last 5 months of last year paying for hotel rooms because their 24 shelters that they have to use were filled to capacity. They just didn't have any more room. So they started to just buy hotel rooms in the local area. And so just in the last couple of weeks, on March 27th, after this new policy came into effect, on one day, just one day, federal officials released 1,100 migrants into El Paso. That was just one day. And in addition, and that's just in one area, by the way, again, one day in just El Paso. And that was in addition to the 3,700 others that were released around the area at the same day. So, I mean, you get a sense of the numbers here, okay? And now the officials, some of these officials at these charities, they don't know who to blame. Some of them are like saying, you know, why are the Border Patrol agents doing this to us? Well, it's not as if they can stop it because they don't have any place to put people either. Quite literally, one of the charity leaders at part of a Catholic charity, she actually says to in an LA Times story, she says, I don't understand why they, meaning Border Patrol agents, let the numbers go up so high. I'm like, well, it's not as if they have any choice in the matter. It's not like they can tell people, hey, you, stay over there. Don't cross our border illegally. I mean, but this is the situation we're in. And there's also very concerning reports that we have about, you know, prior deported sex offenders who have been using these large migrant caravans as cover to sneak back into our country. The Tucson Sector Border Patrol agents apprehended 12 sex offenders in March, just last month, who illegally re-entered the U.S. after they had been previously deported. And they used, again, these migrant groups as cover. And the agents basically said that, I mean, the individuals that they apprehended, they had prior convictions for very serious crimes in California, Arizona, at least 6 other states. And the criminal aliens had committed, mostly were convicted of child sex crimes and sex crimes in general. I mean, these were really serious violent offenders. And the only reason why they were caught was because Border Patrol agents conduct a biometric background check on everybody coming over. And those biometric background checks only pick up people who had prior records in our country. So if they have a prior record in another country, we don't know about it. But if they have one in ours, we pick them up. We can, you know, check that. But I'm kind of wondering what happens. Let's say the system gets so overwhelmed by with these numbers that they don't even have time to do biometric background checks. What happens then? Who knows? Now, I want to bring in our next guest, who is someone who understands the situation at our border, the complexity of our immigration laws, all of that, better than just about anybody else in the country. And I'm talking about Kris Kobach, the former Secretary of State for the great state of Kansas, and also a man whose name has been thrown around recently as a potential immigration czar. Kris, welcome to Breitbart News Tonight.
Great to be back with you.
You know, Kris, as we're talking about this border crisis, and it's just the numbers are staggering. We're looking at 4,000 a day now coming across our border illegally. You have a great article at Breitbart.com where you explain some things that our Department of Homeland Security can do right now to try to solve this. 3 steps, you said. Can you tell our listeners about this?
Yeah. It's not like we're powerless, and it's not like we have to wait for Congress to do something. It's sort of frustrating. We see the Secretary of Homeland Security constantly saying, well, we need Congress to help us before we can solve this problem. No, we can actually solve the immediate crisis without Congress acting, and that's what I talk about in this article. There are basically 3 steps. The first one is finalize a regulation that DHS proposed back in September, and they could have finalized the regulation, made it go into effect in December, 4 months ago, but they've been dragging their feet. And, the lawyers and an agency will always tell you, oh, we need more time. Well, not if the secretary just says, no, I want this done tomorrow. And what the regulation would do is basically supersede the Flores settlement. The Flores settlement is that 20-year-old settlement that limits the amount of time that a family that a minor can be detained, and effectively limits the amount of time that a family can be detained together. Once this regulation is published, we can detain the whole family, keep them together, and that reduces the incentive to bring these minors north in the caravans and using them as get-out-of-jail-free cards, literally, get-out-of-jail-free pawns. So that's the first thing. We do that right now. Second thing is, of course, because of the lack of traditional detention space, the Border Patrol is saying, well, we have to let these people go. Now, I have some quibbles with, more than quibbles, I have some disagreements with the terms on which they're letting them go, but let's just back up. We can create detention space. The federal government right now owns multiple thousands of trailers and mobile homes that we use for hurricane disasters, and they're selling them at bargain prices right now. You can go on the internet and see. We should be using those to create basically processing centers where people you put a fence around a park or a parking lot, and you park 100 of those trailers there, and you can have people have their immigration hearings, have their asylum credible fear hearing, have everything right there. Deploy dozens of immigration judges down to these centers. Don't let them go. Just process the whole thing, and then have a fleet of commercial planes ready to fly them back to their home countries. Would the planes be expensive? Sure, but it would be worth it, because they'd show up back in their home country 3 weeks after they left, and people would start saying, hey, maybe this isn't so easy to get into the United States. They're sending us right back, and they're flying us right back. So that would be a second thing that we can do. And then the third thing that we can do is we absolutely have to put pressure on Mexico, but I don't think threatening to close the border is necessarily the best way to do it, because Mexico knows that that hurts us as well. What we should be doing is threatening to pass a Treasury regulation prohibiting illegal aliens from sending home remittances through Western Union and the like, and then tell Mexico, we'll finalize that regulation and we'll cut off $20 billion a year in capital, which is what the effect of that would be, unless you give us a safe third country agreement like we have with Canada. And what a safe third country agreement is that basically whenever an asylum sets foot in one country or the other, he does not have the ability to pass through that country and then claim asylum in the second country. So with Mexico and the United States, people coming from Central America would have to claim asylum where they step first, and that's Mexico, not go all the way through Mexico to claim asylum in the United States. Demand that Mexico sign that agreement. It's very simple. It's working great with Canada. Get one with Mexico and ask them to throw in some money for the wall as well. We would, if we did all those 3 things, we'd solve the crisis. You would see a dramatic drop in the number of people coming north, and you'd see these caravans coming to an end.
So let me ask you first, because there's a lot of stuff. I have a bunch of questions from what you just said. First off, you mentioned, getting this safe third country agreement with Mexico, like the one we have with Canada. If we were to have that agreement, with Mexico, and it would be legally binding, et cetera, would that supersede the ability of these migrants to request asylum in our country by, the laws that we have in place? If, let's say, because Mexico, they don't, right now they're offering these migrants all sorts of things to stay in Mexico, and the migrants just don't care because they want to come to our country. This is where they want to end up. So obviously these are just economic migrants. They're not really afraid of some persecution.
And frankly, they may know that economic hardship is not a basis for asylum in any country on the planet. And that may very well be why they're saying, yeah, we're not going to apply for asylum here in Mexico because we're just going to try our luck in the United States. And, they may know that their claim is very flimsy at best. But to answer your question, no, the Safe Third Country Agreement would supersede it doesn't supersede American statute. It's consistent with American statute, which does allow a person to seek asylum in another country, even though they may now be standing in the United States. It basically says you have an obligation to seek asylum in the first country you're in.
And if let's say they just say, well, I mean, because we have no way to check really on any of this. So they might say, well, no, this is where I came from. I'm sorry, I need to be here now. Who knows? I mean, the gaming system's so bad, right?
They may want to be in the United States, but if they're coming through Mexico and they're part of a caravan, then we know that they've been in a safe third country already and they had an obligation to apply for asylum there. And under the agreement, we can say, no, we have to turn you around right now, and we will happily deliver you to whatever Mexican consulate or other office you wish to claim asylum in Mexico in.
Okay, that would be huge because that brings me to my next question. You said before you mentioned the safe third country, you gave a scenario that I've been saying all along, which is have the planes right there, fly them home, and film yourself flying them home so that everybody can see back home, hey, look, they took this long, arduous journey, and all that happened is we flew them home. That would be great, right? But I presented that scenario yesterday to one of our guests who is a former immigration judge and who is on our side when it comes to border security. So he's not like somebody who's squishy on this issue. But he said, you know what, you would have all sorts of, you can't do that because the ACLU would be out there, everybody would be out there. We would get in trouble if we tried to ignore this whole process with asylum. And you hear the Democrats already with their talking points saying, how dare you deny due process to people, blah, blah, blah.
No,
we
so
get
what
in
I'm
trouble
saying,
if we did this.
Well, the answer to that is we're not denying due process, and you're not denying them to make a full asylum claim. You're simply saying we will entertain your claim immediately right here. And I guarantee the Immigration Lawyers Association would have immigration lawyers lined up at the processing centers saying, here, I want to represent these people. That's fine. They get all their due process rights. But instead of stringing the case out for 6 months, a year, 2 years, you have the case in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks at the most. The notion that there has to be delay in the system is not supported by any case law or any principle. So we can do the full asylum process, but we can do it much more quickly. And the immigration courts and the immigration attorneys are not used to moving quickly, but they can be compelled to do so.
And this would be, so we would need to essentially still create these giant facilities to hold people, as you said, because that's the problem right now. We don't have the space. So it's either hold them in Mexico or we create a giant tent city, right?
Well, yeah, but it'd actually be a lot more comfortable than a tent city. They'd be living in very nice mobile homes that American citizens live in during times of disaster. We'd go ahead and, spend the money to give them 3 square meals. And they may end up being there for several weeks. But if we can process the asylum claim and get them on a plane to Mexico if they fail to gain asylum, which 90% plus of them will be in that situation, that will send the message that you rightly point out will travel very quickly through Central America, and that is that, look, it's not so easy to get in the United States, and here's this person, 3 weeks ago he left, and here he is again.
So when it comes to this whole interview process, when the migrants make credible fear claims, that's the criteria, as our listeners know. We had on Brandon Judd, who is the president of the National Border Patrol Council, and one of the things that he was floating is this idea of, can you train up Border Patrol agents to be immigration officers and hear these interviews. Do you think that's something possible? Because there's some speculation
Yes.
about, I don't know if that's going to be a fly, but what do you think?
It's certainly possible statutorily to do that. I think he wrote a piece explaining it. It's absolutely correct that you could have Border Patrol personnel who are specially trained being the ones making that assessment. And so that's a great idea. It's the first step, because there is this two-step process with asylum. There's the initial credible fear hearing, and then there's the full asylum hearing. If we can expedite that first step, which frankly it has been very easy for asylum claimants to pass that first step. It's not like there's a lot of scrutiny, a lot of exacting, precise scrutiny of their claims. Most people are being given the benefit of the doubt. If we can speed that up a little bit, that would help.
Okay, now another issue that we have here is President Trump saying that he's going to he's going to leave this threat to take action against Mexico out there, and Mexico has now a year to do something about this, and if they don't do something, then we'll step up and take action. Is that I kind of worry that basically just sent a giant signal to everybody, like, come on in, you got another year.
Well, and I think that's the problem. I think that's part of the problem with threatening to close the border down. Not that it's a bad idea for the president to make that threat, but the problem with that threat is Mexico knows, and everybody knows, that it imposes a cost on us as well. Our country loses economic growth and money and opportunities and trade when commerce is shut down. But the threat I propose is one that actually helps us if we follow through on it, and that is the threat of ending remittances from the majority of people in the United States from Mexico, who are the ones who are here illegally. That is a threat that if we carry through on it actually helps our economy, because the money is not sent home. It stays in circulation in the U.S. economy and helps rev up our economy. So it's actually a good thing if we follow through.
Now, but here's the question I have now. I've heard that the remittance issue might be a red herring, because now a lot of these individuals are using cryptocurrency to send money and not using, a wire service or whatever else. And to try to track down all the cryptocurrency, that's an impossibility right there. Do you think that this is just kind of, we're not going to be able to really get them on this?
I think that there will always be ways to circumvent anything that's put in place. So yes, if we stop wire transfers and bank transfers, there may be ways to get around it. Indeed, one way to get around it is to send cash in the mail. But it will still significantly reduce the amount of money flowing into Mexico if we exercise that threat. And frankly, we may never even have to find out, because I believe if you pass the initial regulation and you tell Mexico, look, we're going to finalize this thing unless you give us a safe third country agreement, I think they're going to give us the agreement. They don't want to risk losing that massive flow of foreign capital. In most years, it's their second biggest source of foreign capital, next to either oil or tourism, depending on the year.
So, okay, it is about playing hardball tactics. Essentially, and using every tool we can. Now, one final question, something that you have talked about in the past, the effect of all of this migration, illegal immigration on American workers. For the first time, we really see working class Americans having their wages rise because we have a tightening labor market. How do you feel this impacts that, this mass of migration impacts the good numbers that we're seeing with wages?
It's going to hurt those good numbers. So yeah, the numbers are good. In the last 12 months, we've seen 3.4% average marginal increase in wages. That's terrific. We haven't seen a wage growth like that in more than a decade. But the current treatment of these caravans is going to hurt that, because believe it or not, when these people come in and say the magic word asylum, regardless of whether they have any plausible claim to asylum, we're giving them what's called immigration parole, which then is used as a basis for giving them a work permit. So we're handing these people a work permit before they even establish that they're entitled to asylum. And so we are seeing tens of thousands of unskilled, largely unskilled workers being brought onto the market right off these caravans, and that is going to have a negative effect on wages. So we're undercutting the progress that the president's administration has made in wage growth if we continue to hand out work permits to these asylum applicants, these caravan members.
Now let's ask also, this is something that I mentioned at the start of the show, that the numbers of people coming into our country right now are so enormous, unlike anything we've seen in the past, really, with regards to Central American migration. And as I mentioned, the Tucson Border Patrol agents actually apprehended recently 12 prior violent sex offenders who were using the migrant caravans from Central America as cover to sneak back into our country. And they were thankfully caught because of our Border Patrol agents conduct this biometric background check, which picks up people who have prior convictions in our country. But what if these numbers get so huge and our Border Patrol gets so spread thin that they're not able to even do that sort of thing? Is that just a possible scenario, or am I just being a little too paranoid on that?
I don't know. Hopefully you're being a little too paranoid. I would say that it's unlikely that the Border Patrol will be unable to do the biometric check, which is basically a fingerprint. This is something we actually started back in 2001 when I was working at the Justice Department on immigration policy back before DHS, back when Justice had the INS. And that's when we started fingerprinting everybody that comes into Border Patrol custody, or back then it was INS custody. And it can be done, taking a fingerprint, scanning it, and then having that scan run through the database of fingerprints that we have doesn't really take that much time. So I can't imagine a scenario in which the sheer numbers cause
overwhelm.
The to stop. Yeah, stop checking fingerprints. Everybody realizes how valuable that is. I just can't imagine that ending.
Now, okay, I have two more questions for you. One serious and the other, well, serious but not as. Okay. First is that your name has been bandied around, been floated as a potential immigration czar, to really look at our immigration system, all of it, that spans multiple departments, really. I know this is kind of unfair for me to ask you this since your name has been floated for this position, but do you think it's a good idea or bad idea, and are you interested in it if you are called upon to serve?
Well, if the president feels the need to tap me to serve, I'm certainly going to consider that. As far as have advised the president for years now, and obviously want to help him in the administration and the country. As far as the czar position goes, it depends on whether it's a truly effective position. We have had Obama created a bunch of czars, and Bush had a couple. Some of these czars are just little more than a White House policy position that doesn't really have any authority to execute and do anything. And so the devil's in the details. If this is just a position, an advisor who has a fancy title, then I think no, it probably won't solve much. But if the position does have the weight of the president and the authority to tell the various cabinet agencies what needs to be done, then it actually could be effective. So it really depends on what it looks like. And it's not clear to me what plan, if any, there is to create such a position.
We shall see. But now my final thing for you is I want to play this clip of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from Brooklyn, who frequently does these live streams with people, late at night, where she just sort of gives her opinion and answers questions that people pose to her. And she had a comment really denouncing the Border Patrol agents, and her comment, she accused them of something that I had never quite heard them being accused of before. And I want to get your take on whether this is what she's talking about here. Can we, Captain Mike, can we play this clip of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about Border Patrol?
At least I'm not trying to cage children on the border and inject them with drugs. That's not a mistake. That is a deliberate policy to attack people based on their national origin. That's not a mistake. That's just hatred. That's just cruelty. That's just wrong.
What in the world is she talking about?
Oh man, she just sounds crazy. I mean, the idea that Border Patrol agents are acting out of racial hatred and in putting kids in cages and injecting them with harmful drugs. I mean, this is just, it's amazing, the stuff that comes out of her mouth. And I guess she just says it with a lot of spirit, and people on the left swoon, and everything's okay, even though it's completely false. I mean, I'm just blown away that this person is in Congress and saying things like this, and really, trashing the reputations and the integrity of our Border Patrol officers. I mean, these are great people who are putting their lives on the line, and they're handling this crisis for us. And meanwhile, you have AOC trashing them like this completely falsely. It's just ridiculous.
I would add that she's also making fun of bulletproof vests at the border. Apparently, this is the thing this evening on the left, where MSNBC journalist Jacob Soboroff, who prior to this issue seemed to be a reasonably fair guy, even if left-wing, he mocked Fox News reporters for wearing a flak jacket near the border, and he tweeted 9 hours ago, "This is totally ridiculous. I have never once worn a bulletproof vest at the border, nor has CPB ever asked me to, even while on a chase with Border Patrol to apprehend migrants in a remote Arizona desert in the middle of the night, because the border is not a war zone." This is what Soboroff said. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez retweeted that, or gave him a shout-out, I should say, and she said, she did retweet it, and she says, "Does live from the border mean Party City?" She was mocking the Fox News reporters' bulletproof vest, saying that it looked like it was a prop rather than an actual vest. And she adds, "Fox is really out here doing the most on a budget to make the border look more dangerous than it is." Now, I have no idea about the quality of the vest or otherwise that the Fox News reporter was wearing, but she's mocking the idea that the border is dangerous. And my question is, why does she hate Central Americans so much? Because the reason that we have Border Patrol and the reason that we have so many security precautions there, and we put our own reporters in danger, by the way, when they go to Mexico and cover these stories. There is a war going on. There's a civil war in Mexico between the drug cartels. There are mass graves. There are Border Patrol vehicles shot at. There are Americans killed, Mexicans killed. What sort of unreality is she living in? And when does a member of Congress think it's okay to mock what's going on at the border, to mock the risks that people take?
It just shows she's living on another planet, and she's ignorant of what the situation is. I mean, as Breitbart's own Brandon Darby has been reporting for years with his team, this narco-terrorist situation where you have cartels that effectively are free from government control in certain provinces, in certain states, that they routinely assassinate people, and that they are incredibly violent. She's obviously ignorant of all that, and I've spent a great deal of time on the border with Breitbart's Brandon Darby, and he knows the border better than most Americans do, probably better than just about anyone. And he will tell you that in certain areas, you better be looking over your shoulder, and you should hesitate in getting out of your vehicle. And there are other places where you're perfectly safe, but depending on where that Fox broadcaster was, a bulletproof vest might be the least amount of protection you should consider using. So there are some very, very violent and dangerous places on our border. And it should also be noted, for those of your listeners who don't know, there are many places on the border where the cartels have lookouts on American soil. On the hilltops, on American soil, they have heavily fortified positions with significant armaments on these hilltops, where the cartel scouts will watch American Border Patrol vehicles and radio to their cartel partners where the vehicles are in order to report their locations. So it's the cartels are powerful. They use a great amount of deadly force, and in some places they operate with impunity in the United States. I doubt AOC knows that. In fact, I would be amazed if she even heard that.
Yeah, it's just amazing how they forget what the actual issues are. And she sits in her apartment and drinks wine and does millennial things and mocks the people in her own generation, mocks the millennials who put on a uniform and go and protect this country.
Yeah.
You know, I think she should go to the border, and I know that our own reporters would take her there. Brandon Darby, I know, would be a good tour guide. But if she doesn't want to do that, go with the border patrol. Go with anybody. But recognize, you know, I get checked all the time in our little internal discussions here at Breitbart. You know, when I once made the point in discussing this with Brandon that, you know, in Israel, the Israeli public resisted putting up a fence or a wall to separate the, or I should say, to secure the Israeli communities from Palestinian communities that were sending suicide bombers into Israel. The Israeli public didn't like the idea of building these barriers until there were so many suicide bombings and hundreds of civilians were being murdered every week, or, you know, week after week of dozens of people being murdered, hundreds overall, over 1,000 if you include the soldiers. And it was only with that carnage that they finally said, okay, we'll put up this fence, we'll put up this wall. And I said to Brandon, you know, if there were terrorists attacking people, maybe Congress would build the wall. And Brandon said to me, there are terrorists attacking people. Look how the cartels behave. They're worse than ISIS. They cut limbs off of living people. They murder hundreds of civilians and bury them in mass graves after they've incinerated their remains in ovens, like something out of World War II. Look at what they do. This is the unspeakable, horrific violence of the Mexican cartels. And you know, you cannot understate what's going on there, so for her to mock this bulletproof vest thing, and the reporter from Fox actually said that he was told apparently to put it on by the Border Patrol. So, and I'm sure, you know, why not? People would love to take a pot shot at a reporter or a Border Patrol person. There have been many murders in some parts of the border recently. It's not like, anyway, we're belaboring the point here, but.
Yeah, Americans get shot at repeatedly. I mean, and it's not just people who are obviously on TV or people who are obviously members of the Border Patrol. Remember the American tourist person who was on a jet ski on a personal watercraft in one of the lakes along the border who got shot by the cartels. I mean, they do shoot people, and they often act recklessly when they shoot people. It's not like they only do things under cover of darkness. So if a Border Patrol officer tells me, put on a bulletproof vest, I'm putting on the vest. And I don't blame the reporter one bit for trying to protect his life while he's down there reporting.
You know what, Kris Kobach, I also have to point out really quickly before we let you go that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in her statement there where she claimed that Border Patrol agents were caging children and injecting them because of their race or something, you know, that offensive thing she just said. I need to point out to folks that according to the statistics put out by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Public Affairs Office, in 2016, fiscal year 2016, over half of Border Patrol agents were Hispanic or Latino, identified as Hispanic or Latino. That's the latest figures that we have. 51% of the Border Patrol agents. So she's claiming that 51% of the Border Patrol agents, or these Border Patrol agents in general, are doing these racist and evil things to people, to the migrants. It's so ridiculously offensive, everything that she just said. I just had to point that out. But, Kris Kobach, I want to, again, thank you for coming.
Never has someone so ignorant said so much that is so wrong to such great fanfare on the American political left. It is just ridiculous what she says.
Yes, and it's always, she just keeps topping herself with ridiculousness. I want to thank you again so much for joining us and encourage our listeners to check out the great op-ed that you wrote for Breitbart.com on this topic of what we can do